Summary of The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Mary Lennox is a mean and self-centered 10-year-old girl. She is born in colonial India. Mary's mother didn't want a child, so she gives her to an ayah right away. Mary's servants keep her away from her parents and give her everything she wants. All of this changes when one morning a servant who isn't Mary's ayah greets her. In the backyard, Mary pretends to have a garden and hears her mother talking to an officer about how it is also affecting the maids. Mary finds out the next day that cholera has spread to her home. Mary is forgotten by everyone. She stays in her room for 2 days until 2 cops finally find her. They are upset because Mary's parents have died and the officers were uncertain as to whether or not Mary existed. Mary is sent to England and given to Mrs. Medlock, who works as a maid for Mary's uncle Mr. Craven. He takes care of Mary for a short time. Mary tried to be detached, but Mrs. Medlock's stories about Misselthwaite Manor and Mrs. Craven's death captivate her. Their death turned Mr. Craven into the miserable hunchback he is today, and Mary finds this sad. When Mary wakes up the next morning, Martha, one of the maids, has already started a fire in the grate. When Martha says that she thought Mary was going to be a black Indian, Mary gets very angry. When Mary finds out she needs to learn how to dress herself, she feels even worse. Martha tells her to go outside and says that the yard has been locked since Mrs. Craven died 10 years ago. Mary strolls around the property. She has a short conversation with Ben Weatherstaff, an angry old gardener, and then checks out the cooking grounds. Mary looks up and sees a robin in a tree. The tree looks like it's in a yard, but there's no door. Ben is asked about it when she goes back to him. He takes her to meet his friend the robin, and Mary tells him she's lonely. Mary walks around the grounds, talks to the bird, and thinks about the locked garden for a few days. Mary asks Martha about the locked yard one night. Martha says that Mr. Craven and his wife owned it. The branch Mrs. Craven was sitting on broke, and she died. She used to sit on a rose-covered tree. Mary hears someone crying out of the blue, but Martha tells her it's just the scullery girl being loud about her toothache. The next day it rains, so Mary looks around the house. She hears the crying again, but Mary is caught by Mrs. Medlock before she can look into it. Mary and Martha talk in the morning about how Mary would like to see the land in Martha's family's house. In her story, Martha talks about her brother Dickon, who gets along well with animals. Martha says she will ask her mother, Mrs. Sowerby, if Mary can come over later when she is at home. Mary is by herself, so she walks around the gardens and finds Ben. He tells her it's spring and shows her the plants that are starting to grow. The robin comes over and walks with them. Mary asks Ben if there are roses growing in his yard, but Ben won't answer. Mary finds a key ring half buried in the dirt and takes it with her as he runs off. When Mary goes back to the place where she found the key the next day, she finds that the door is locked. Mary slips inside with the key and finds herself in a yard full of roses that look like they are dead. After dinner, Mary says she wishes she had planting tools. Martha and Mary write Dickon a letter together and include money so that he can buy Mary the tools and plants she needs to start her own garden, which she names the Secret Garden. Mary and Ben talk about roses that Ben used to take care of for a young woman. Ben also tells Mary how to tell if flowers are living. Mary runs off and finds Dickon sitting in the woods. She tells Dickon about her secret garden, and he swears to keep it a secret. For several hours, they pull weeds and trim trees. Mr. Craven calls Mary for the first time after lunch. He looks sad, but Mary thinks he'd be beautiful if he wasn't. He asks her what she wants, and she says she only wants land to grow a garden. Mary hears yelling and crying in the middle of the night and goes to find out what's going on. She finds a room with a boy who looks bad and says his name is Colin Craven and he is Mr. Craven's son. It looks like Mr. Craven doesn't like Colin, and everyone thinks Colin is going to die or get a hunchback. Colin tells everyone not to look at him or talk about him. He is the only doctor who has ever said that Colin has a chance. Mary knows Colin is living the high life. When Colin learns that a garden is locked, he tells his staff to take him there. Mary tells him that they should play there without anyone seeing. He shows Mary a picture of his mother that he is covering up and then asks her to come see him again. Mary tells Martha in the morning that she found Colin, but she says that the kids need to keep the fact that they know each other a secret. Martha is shocked that Colin likes Mary. She says that some people say Colin is fine, but spoiled, and won't do well inside. A little while later, Colin calls Mary. They talk about Dickon and the land, and Mary tells Colin to only think about live things. Dr. Craven and Mrs. Medlock walk in and make the kids laugh. Colin says he doesn't want to remember that he's sick when Dr. Craven tells him to. The next week is rainy, and the kids spend it together. During that time, Mary checks to see if Colin can be trusted to tell him about the secret garden. Colin makes up his mind that he'd like to meet Dickon. The next sunny morning, Mary gets up early and goes outside. She sees Dickon working in the secret garden with Captain the Fox and Soot the Crow. He tells them to be careful because the robin is making a nest and they don't want to scare it. Lisa thinks that Colin will be upset that Mary isn't there for 2 days, but Mary doesn't care. Finally, Martha sends Mary to Colin because he is having a temper fit and can't calm down. Colin says he will not let Dickon back into the house, and Mary says she will never go see Colin again. Mary tells Colin he's not going to die and says he's making people feel bad. Later, Mary starts to think that Colin might have been scared all day. Mary wakes up that night and hears Colin yelling. She walks into her room and is told to calm down by the nurse. When Mary gets mad, she charges into Colin's room and screams at him. She asks to see Colin's back and thinks it's okay. The nurse tells Colin again what the doctor in London said: Colin is fine, just weak and spoiled, and he needs to get some fresh air. He calms down and tells Dickon he wants to meet him. The next morning, Mary meets Dickon in the yard and tells him what's going on with Colin. Later, she tells Colin about Dickon's monsters, and Colin says sorry for being bad. This is when Mary tells him she found the secret garden. Dr. Craven is surprised to see Colin looking so good when he gets there later. He tells the kids they can take Colin outside. He brings his monsters into Colin's room the next day. Following a week, Dickon and Mary will Colin outside and into the secret garden. Colin immediately wakes up and says he's going to get better and live forever. They talk about how Colin will stand up when he doesn't feel scared. A little while later, the kids see Ben, who is mad, looking at them over the wall. Colin, on the other hand, makes him very angry when Ben calls him a poor cripple. In response, Colin stands up and tells Ben to go into the yard. He says that this yard is now his and that no one else can see it. Ben says he promised Mrs. Craven that he would take care of her roses before she died. After that, he gets Colin a rose to plant, and Colin thinks that his better health is magic. Mary talks to Colin about his bad mood over the next few months, and the two of them decide that the magic in the garden is real. After some time, Colin calls Dickon, Mary, and Ben to talk about the power of magic, which is the subject of a science experiment he is about to do. He thinks the magic is making him better and will keep him alive. As they sit in a circle, Colin says over and over that everything is magic. Then he takes a walk around the yard and says that he won't tell Mr. Craven about his healing until he is ready. Over time, Dickon tells his mother everything. She sends Dickon bread and milk when she finds out that Colin is worried that his hunger will reveal the secret. The kids teach Dickon some strength training moves from Bob Hayworth, a local wrestler, and they use them in their act. The adults don't understand why Colin still acts sick even though he looks better. Colin decides after some time to stop hiding his mother's picture because he thinks she was magic. In the fall, Colin wakes up one day feeling better and wants to thank the magic. Ben tells them to sing the doxology, and Dickon leads them. After a short time, Mrs. Sowerby comes into the backyard. She tells Mary she's pretty and tells Colin that Mr. Craven will like him. She hasn't heard of magic, but she thinks it's all the same big good thing. Mrs. Sowerby tells Colin that his mother's spirit is in the yard before they leave for their lunch. All of this is going on at the same time that Mr. Craven is moving through Europe, as usual being sad and angry. Colin first says he's going to live forever on the same day that Mr. Craven starts to notice how beautiful nature is. He starts to feel better about himself, and one night he dreams that his wife is in the secret garden. He gets a letter from Mrs. Sowerby the next morning asking him to go back home. While he's away, Mr. Craven often thinks about Colin and questions whether it's too late to make things right. When he gets back to the house, Mrs. Medlock tells him about Colin's strange behavior and says Colin is outside. It sounds like Mr. Craven can hear kids playing in the secret yard as he walks around. Mary and Colin rushed out the door and into Mr. Craven's arms right away. They tell him all about the garden, magic, and how miraculously Colin got better. The people who work in the house are shocked when they see Mr. Craven and Colin laughing as they walk back to the house.
About the author. Burnett was born in 1849. She was the third of 5 children. When she was 4 years old, her father died, and her mother moved the family to Tennessee in the United States. When Burnett was young, she started putting stories in magazines to make money for her family. In 1972, she got married to Dr. Swan Burnett. They lived in Paris for 2 years while he finished medical school. Burnett wrote and released her first book, That Lasso Lowries, in 1877. It got good reviews. She became interested in Christian Science, spiritualism, and theosophy in the 1880s. These ideas had an impact on her later works, especially The Secret Garden. She lived in England at a manor house that inspired Misselthwaite Manor and got married again for a short time until 1907. She then moved back to the New York area, kept writing, and lived a luxurious life until she died in 1924.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.